Good morning, and welcome to Awaken Church. Whether you are live here today or streaming, we're excited to be able to be with you in flesh, if not in spirit, or maybe the other way around. So hopefully you guys are thrilled as well. We should be in for a fun ride today, because today is a church, and during this teaching, we're going to be taking a sharp turn from where we were to where we are now headed. And as we do so, I want to start off by sharing a very small guilty pleasure. I've been spending this past week watching UFC fights on YouTube. It all started because I wanted to see what happened with the Conor McGregor-Daniel Poirier fight last week. And I wasn't about to pay however much it was, $80 for the pay-per-view. And because, I just don't do that. So anyway, so I just waited until this week, and I wanted to kind of just roam around and find some highlights from the match, and got a chance to watch it. And then, of course, what happens when you go onto YouTube and you start watching a video is you're like, oh, there's another one, and you start going down the YouTube rabbit trail, and that's what happened to me. So I just got into all these UFC fights. I got down into the YouTube rabbit hole. And so I know maybe some of you in here think that's totally ridiculous because, what could possibly be so fascinating about watching two people just brutally beat each other up? That's not entertainment, that's just brutality. And for those of you who think that way, I just want to say, I know. But I want you to do something for me today. I want you to listen to something that I've queued up for you, that Harlan's got queued up for you. It's the introduction to one of Conor McGregor's fights by a man named Bruce Buffer. So go ahead, Harlan, you can play that now.
Fighting out of the blue corner, a mixed martial artist holding professional record, 17 wins, 2 losses. He stands 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighing in at 145 pounds. Fighting out of Dublin, Ireland, presenting the pride of Ireland and the #3 ranked featherweight fighter in the world, the notorious Conor McGregor!
I know, you're like, I didn't even understand what he said. That's totally okay. That's not the point. The point is, after listening to that, how can you not get excited, right? And just kind of energized at whatever's going to happen next. Bruce Buffer could announce my going to the bathroom and I'd be excited. You understand? That's just the way it goes. And it's amazing because he does it with nothing more than his voice. It's just the voice, the power in his voice, and he generates this incredible energy. And so he just has the type of way of getting you on your feet with this introduction, kind of getting you bouncing in your seat and like, all right, come on, let's go. Anyway, most of you all know that as a church, we're in the middle of a series that we've entitled Jesus Year One. And the point of this series is to take a look at the first year of Jesus's ministry. And one of the things we've done, now we're on week 5 out of 7 weeks, and one of the things we've done over the course of the past 4 weeks is understand that with each step, each of Jesus' first steps, as he's going into ministry, first of all, they're intentional and deliberate, and he is making a statement with each one of them. And so we covered them last week. I'll just go ahead and revisit them again for you this week. I am the Son of God. That was confirmed at Jesus' baptism. That was the declaration. As a matter of fact, that's what God said. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. There's no way to confirm the fact that you're the Son of God than to have God say, yeah, this is my kid, right? Holy Spirit descended upon him. That was the first declaration. And then the second was, I am the Son of Man. When Jesus was led by the Holy Spirit into the wilderness, he didn't get ambushed by Satan. It was the other way around. Jesus was the one that forced the confrontation of an enemy who would much rather hide in the shadows and be deceitful. And in overcoming temptation and confronting the enemy, reminding us that we too have that same power and authority through Christ. I am launching a movement That's what he did when he gathered together his disciples. And even who he chose is a reflection of how Jesus saw warfare going down. And then finally, last week, this will be a new covenant of grace and not law. Those are the four declarations that was proclaimed at Jesus' first miracle at the wedding of Cana. Perhaps an incidental event where Jesus was revealing himself through the first miracle, but everything that Jesus did in performing it was intentional, thoughtful, and designed to make a statement. And so, if I can summarize another way, these past 4 weeks have been your Bruce Buffer introduction, right? Jesus has been announced, and he has done so. He has been announced in the most daring and brilliant way possible for those who are willing to see it. In the spiritual realm, it was far more exciting than what Bruce Buffer just did for Conor McGregor. You understand? Jesus has been announced. He is in the ring. He is the champion. His opponent has been exposed. And now, this week, the bell is being rung. And Jesus is moving into the center of the ring. So, round one takes place in an area called Judea. And so, for context, I put up a little map for you to be able to see. Ancient Israel, or Israel in Jesus' day, was primarily composed of three main regions. Galilee is to the north, and so you can see that's where Cana is. That's where Jesus started from. That's where the wedding took place, where Jesus performed his first miracle. Samaria is in the center, and then finally Judea represents the territory in the south. Judea used to be, the area kind of used to be referred to as Judah, because it would belong to the tribe of Judah. A bit smaller than that, but that is what that area was referred to around Jerusalem. After the Babylonian captivity, it got renamed to Judea. Judea literally means the land of the Jews. And this area, which previously would have belonged to the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, Simeon, Dan, and part of Ephraim, this would be considered the Jewish nation at Jesus' time, right? The Judean area would be like, this is the heart of Jewish nation. Samaria was not necessarily considered part of, they were the half-breeds. Judea was considered. So this is where Jesus is going to. So from Cana, this is where Jesus heads. This is where we are going to pick up the story. And I want you to just, as we understand as we move forward, there are three main events that happened during this round, right? Three highlights of this round. It's going to be Jesus' cleansing of the temple, his conversation with Nicodemus, and then John the Baptist's testimony about Jesus. That's going to be the three things we'll cover, and then we're going to bring all of this back together again. Is that me? Okay. Let's start with John chapter 2, starting in verse 13, the cleansing of the temple. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration that would take place in about sometime early spring. So Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold the doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." So Jesus goes in the temple, he's throwing things around and telling these money changers and sellers to get out. Oftentimes when we read the passage, what we remember of this is that Jesus was mad. Jesus was angry. That tends to be the interesting sticking point for us. But it's really interesting because the passage never actually says that. It never actually says that Jesus was mad or that Jesus was angry. Not here, nor in the later passages found in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There is some controversy whether this event happens once or twice. That's not necessarily the relevant point, the salient point. The salient point is that Jesus goes in and he wreaks havoc. And I understand that even though it never says that Jesus is angry, that's why I say we have to be a bit careful about putting that on him, most of us in reading what happened might infer that Jesus might have been, if not angry, at least indignant. And I just want to say this in response to that emotional feeling. I don't know. We don't know if Jesus was truly angry when he went into the temple, but we'll say that righteous indignation is sometimes the most appropriate response to a given circumstance. And some of those circumstances might be when someone vulnerable is being mistreated. I think when that happens, we should get angry and upset and indignant about it. When there's injustice, maybe not every form, but many forms of injustice should get us righteously aroused, right? Angered. And then maliciousness and cruelty to someone who doesn't deserve it. When we see those things happen, I think the natural response in us should be that we get a bit upset about it because there's some injustice that is being done. And for me, I love the fact that this is the way Jesus responds. And I think you should as well because of what it means. It means that Jesus takes things personally. That he's not some emotionless robot, or that God is not some passionless God who sits up on his throne, propping his feet up upon the stool of the earth and just saying, yeah, whatever happens, happens. That's not how God is. If Jesus is willing to fight, right? That's what this passage means. That's what this passage, this story reveals, is that Jesus is willing to fight on behalf of someone he loves. In this case, it happens to be his father. In this case, it happens to be going into his father's earthly home and seeing what was being done to it that got him riled up. And he shows emotion, passionate emotion. That's really cool. For some of us, maybe that brings up an interesting question that if Jesus is so emotional and passionate about what was happening in the temple, then how come he doesn't necessarily get riled up when I'm mistreated or when there's mistreatment here on earth? Because sometimes we want to see God react a little more strongly, don't we? So it's really interesting. For about a period of about 4 to 5 years, in our family, our entire family took Taekwondo together. For those of you who've been a part of our church for a bit longer time, you probably remember that season because I would share a number of stories, and sometimes I would come up here injured because, I did something to myself stupidly while fighting, or going through exercises in Taekwondo. Well, in Taekwondo, one of the things is there something I can do different on this one? That's my bad, guys. So anyway, I'm sure I'm doing something. My beard is brushing against it is what's happening. Don't laugh. I can grow facial hair if I really, really wanted. It'd just take a long, long time. Yeah. All right, the struggle is real. So anyway, sorry. So Taekwondo. So in Taekwondo, if you want to progress past a certain point, like you want to get past green belt in our case, what you would have to do is you would have to spar. You would have to fight. So in order to advance, part of your test would include sparring. And during sparring, you would wear pads, but, it's real. We're hitting each other for real. Pads allow us to be able to go all out. So anyway, the challenge to taking a test is when you go test, oftentimes who you're sparring depends on who is also taking a test that week or that month. And they're also going after the same belt. So what happens is when you're going in and you're preparing, you have to spar if you want to advance to the next belt. But who you spar is a bit unpredictable. And usually they try to match up like with like. They don't ever match up a guy against a girl. Maybe sometimes with their kids. But it's usually pretty comparable. Well, sometimes just because of who is testing that week, there is an unequal matching or pairing. So I remember this, usually that's not a problem, because I remember this one time we were going into a test, and Talia was matched up with someone who is much bigger than her. So I showed a little picture of our kids in Taekwondo. So this is yellow belt up until, they're happy, except for Isabel. She's never happy. But anyway, they're happy. I'm just kidding. Okay, so anyway, they're happy about it. But at this point in time, they have not yet sparred. They've not yet taken the test, right? So anyway, we remember a time when Talia was forced to take a test, and she was matched up with another girl who happened to be quite a bit larger and stronger than she was. And again, usually this isn't a problem because the person who's larger and stronger usually doesn't go after it full bore, right? They just understand I'm matched against someone. So it's not that we're not fighting, but I'm not going after you. Well, this girl decided she was going after Talia, and she was pounding on her. And so we're watching, and Talia, so what you do is you have this ring, and she was just consistently being pushed back and out of the ring. They'd have to restart. And Talia's looking around, it's like, what is going on? She's crying during the match. You can see it, right? And yet this girl would not let up. So if you're a father watching this, watching your young daughter get pummeled in the ring mercilessly and no one else is stopping it, what do you think I want to do? I want to jump into that ring and beat this girl up. You understand? So I'm witnessing this injustice. I'm tempted to do that, but I can't. And everybody here understands why. Because if I went in, I would now be the bully, not her. So here is Jesus in the flesh. He goes in the temple, he expresses his anger, his righteous indignation, and he does it appropriately. It isn't the only time Jesus gets upset or passionate, but it is certainly the first time he has done it during the course of his ministry. And it was and when he expresses this righteous indignation, it was as God the Son, as flesh and bone, passionate, measured, and appropriate. Does that make sense? Because if it was God not in the flesh, it would be overkill and inappropriate. And I don't know if that's a perfect answer, but for me, I'm like, okay, God, I get it. That as much as you might like to, God can't be the bully. Although, sometimes it'd be really cool, wouldn't it? So, anyway. The event closes in John chapter 2 with these words, verses 23 to 25. Because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. I want to teach you all a word. It's a word, perspicacity. Perspicacity. That's a fun word. You want to say that with me? It'd be kind of fun. Perspicacity. Again, perspicacity. Okay, obviously you guys are like, no, I'm not saying that word. So what perspicacity means is keenness of mental perception and understanding. Keenness of mental perception and understanding. This is the quality of Jesus that John is revealing in these passages. It means Jesus sees people with perfect clarity. That's one of the qualities of being God in flesh. Jesus sees people with perfect clarity. Jesus is not impressed or dazzled by people's devotion to him. When people say, I believe in you, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. Jesus is able to see past the veneer of shallow faith and knows that they're just at the beginning stages of where they need to be. It's not that the people are being disingenuous. Their faith is real. It's just nascent, right? It's just really young. It's just really immature. And so he's not getting overly excited about them putting their trust in him because he understands that as yet it is an untested faith. A faith that comes from witnessing the miraculous, a faith that comes from hopefulness, but not one that has been tested or is stable or sturdy. Not yet. But it's important to realize Jesus' state of mind and how he's seeing people because this sets up the event that comes next. So far we've covered one highlight of round one in Jesus' match, right? So here we go to the second highlight. It's Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus. Starting in chapter 3, verse 1. There was a man named Nicodemus, a Jewish religious leader who was a Pharisee. After dark one evening, he came to speak with Jesus. "Rabbi," he said, "we all know that God has sent you to teach us. Your miraculous signs are evidence that God is with you." Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth. Unless you are born again, you cannot see the kingdom of God." "What do you mean?" exclaimed Nicodemus. "How can an old man go back into his mother's womb and be born again?" So Nicodemus is an important man. He's an important religious leader of the group of Pharisees. He believes in the law. He's faithfully followed the law his entire life, and he has risen to be a leader even amongst the Pharisees. And perhaps the greatest credit to the character and goodness of this man is he has been able to look past the appearance of Jesus, been able to look past the followers of Jesus, and to be able to see the unique testimony and works of Jesus. And yet he comes to Jesus, not openly, but in the night, in the darkness. And Jesus, in his perspicacity, challenges Nicodemus with these words. Verse 5. Jesus replied, "I assure you, no one can enter the kingdom of God without being born of water and the Spirit. Humans can reproduce only human life, but the Holy Spirit gives birth to spiritual life. So don't be surprised when I say you must be born again. The wind blows wherever it wants, just as you can hear the wind but can't tell where it comes from or where it's going, so you can't explain how people were born of the Spirit." So this is how Jesus decides to respond to him. He says, "Nicodemus, you were born of water." Jesus probably could have said, "You were born in the fluid of your mother's amniotic sac," but that's, whatever. That's not where he chose to go. So Nicodemus, you were born of water into human life. But if you want to experience spiritual life, you must be born again, and this time you must be born of the Spirit. And that is the only way that you can enter into the kingdom of God, to be born of the Spirit. And I know understanding this is going to be tricky. It's going to be a bit elusive, trying to be kind of like trying to catch the wind. How are these things possible? Nicodemus asks, starting in verse 9. I'm skipping ahead just a little bit. Jesus replied, "You are a respected Jewish teacher, and yet you don't understand these things. I assure you, we tell you what we know and have seen, and yet you won't believe our testimony. But if you don't believe me when I tell you about earthly things, how can you possibly believe if I tell you about heavenly things?" So Nicodemus, you are a respected teacher of the law. How can you not understand this? Let me assure you, there are things you have learned that you must now unlearn if you want to understand the truths that I am now teaching you. That's the only way for you to be born again. And if you think about it, this might explain to us why Jesus chose simple people, common people, to be his first followers. They had less to unlearn. And so Jesus tells Nicodemus that this is what you have to unlearn in order to learn what I have for you. And for Nicodemus, as an older man, that's a difficult task. Not impossible, just difficult. And then Jesus continues by breaking things down even more simply. John 3, verses 16 and 19. "For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, so that whosoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. There is no judgment against anyone who believes in him. Not believe in him has already been judged for not believing in God's one and only Son." Thank you, buddy. "And the judgment is based on this fact. God's light came into the world, but people loved darkness more than light, for their actions were evil. So these words, these passages are some of the most popular and powerful in all of Scripture. And for many of us, we're familiar with these verses, right? John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. What many of us forget or miss is they were not spoken to the crowds. These are not words spoken to the multitudes. They were words spoken in a private conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus, a way Jesus was making simple a truth that he earlier said was as elusive to grasp as the wind. And so Nicodemus is able to accept it. Nicodemus is able to accept that maybe he's not too old to be born again or to accept Jesus as Savior. And for those who have read the Gospel of John all the way through, what you will read very soon in the Gospel of John is that Nicodemus does become a believer. He does become a follower of Jesus. After that night, Jesus gathers his disciples again, and he prepares to leave the city of Jerusalem and go up to the countryside where he can do some teaching, and where Jesus and his disciples also do some baptizing, which leads us to the third event of round one, our final highlight. John chapter 3, starting in verse 26. So John's disciples came to him and said, Rabbi, the man you met on the other side of the Jordan River, the one you identified as the Messiah, is also baptizing people. And everyone is going to him instead of coming to us. John replied, no one can receive anything unless God gives it from heaven. You yourselves know how plainly I told you I am not the Messiah. I am only here to prepare the way for him. It is the bridegroom who marries the bride, and the bridegroom's friend is simply glad to stand with him and hear his vows. Therefore, I am filled with joy at his success. He must become greater and greater, and I must become less and less. Do y'all know what Dan Marino, Ted Williams, Barry Bonds, Karl Malone, Barry Sanders, and Ty Cobb all have in common? Yeah. They're amongst the greatest athletes who have ever lived and yet not won a championship. And it's interesting. There's not a lot of glory in coming in second place. Despite the fact that they're some of the greatest athletes who have ever lived, their legacy is a bit tarnished because they have not won a championship. Do you know there was a research study done, and I don't know who pays people to do research studies like this, but whatever. There's a research study done on Olympic athletes, and it was really fascinating. They did a research study on the happiness, satisfaction, and sense of fulfillment differences between whether you win the silver medal or the bronze medal. And what they found was something really interesting, that consistently and quite significantly, those who won the bronze medal were happier, more satisfied, and more fulfilled than those who won the silver medal. Which is really interesting, right? Because the ones who won the silver medal did better. And what they found was the primary difference is who these people compared themselves to in interviews. The silver medalist always compared themselves to the gold medalist, saying, I came up just short. I could have won if I just ... Whereas the bronze medalists compared themselves to everyone who didn't win a medal. Woo! I made it onto the podium. Their level and degree of satisfaction were different because of who they compared themselves to. Isn't that interesting? So here in this story, John the Baptist doesn't struggle with the silver medal problem. He understands his place. He understands that I was always designed to be in Jesus' shadow. I had the spotlight on me initially because I was the one they saw. But when Jesus came, I joyfully and willingly stepped aside so the King of Kings, the champion, might take the spotlight. And I must, as a result of this, become less and less so he might become greater and greater. It's really interesting because some of the disciples of John didn't quite catch that. As a matter of fact, there are some disciples of John who you'd think if John's telling you, hey, that's the guy, I'm not the guy, you should follow the guy, that everyone who followed John would just go to follow the guy. But that's not actually what happens. When you read the book of Acts, you find that there was this group that remained faithful to John the Baptist all the way through. And so even Apollos was taught by some members of that group. It's really, anyway, tangent. The point is, John accepted his place in the shadows underneath the light, the spotlight that Jesus encompassed. Verses 31 to 36. This is what John continues to say about Jesus. He has come from above and is greater than anyone else. We are of the earth, and we speak of earthly things. But he has come from heaven and is greater than anyone else, because he testifies to what he has seen and heard. But how few believe what he tells them. Anyone who accepts this testimony can affirm that God is true. I appreciate the musical accompaniment to my reading. That's cool. For he is sent by God. He speaks God's words, for God gives him the Spirit without limit. The Father loves his Son and has put everything in his hands. And anyone who believes in God's Son has eternal life. Anyone who doesn't obey the Son will never experience eternal life, but remains under God's angry judgment. So John closes out this portion, this season of Jesus' ministry by focusing on Jesus' identity and his purpose. Believe in him, believe and receive eternal life. Refuse to believe and refuse to submit and refuse to obey and incur God's angry judgment. That is the essence of what John wants his listeners and followers to understand. So, if you're a fighter, round one is always the most dangerous round because you're not warmed up yet. You're just getting into the fight, and you're not sure of what to expect from your opponent. So round one is always the most dangerous round, but that said, one of the key strategies of every good fighter going into round one is controlled aggression. Controlled aggression. And what controlled aggression means is if you're a good fighter going into round one, you want to be the one moving forward and the other person the one moving backwards. You don't want to go in out of control, right? That's one way to do it, but that's not what controlled aggression means. You don't go in out of control. You simply go wanting to impose your tempo rather than having it dictated to you by your opponent. That is how good fighters fight. Going into round one, feeling out their opponent, but with controlled aggression, trying to control the tempo rather than having your opponent impose their tempo upon you. Controlled aggression. That is how Jesus begins his ministry. Right? He goes in the temple, controlled, throwing over tables, kicking people out, saying, "You are not to defy my Father's house." He is imposing his tempo and not responding to someone else's. Controlled aggression. No more illicit profiting off my Father's name and in my Father's house. I am the Son of God. I will not allow it. He makes some enemies, but he also earns himself some additional followers who are starting to believe, but Jesus remains cautious. Controlled aggression, right? He remains cautious. He doesn't throw himself. He understands there's no knockout blow right here. People are starting to follow, but their faith is young and untested. Let's kind of take it easy. Jesus talks with Nicodemus, and he shares truth to him, who is Nicodemus, an open and intelligent seeker. And what does Jesus tell him? He says, Nicodemus, you're a teacher, jab. You should know better, jab. How could you have missed this? Body shot. Right? This isn't going to be easy for you to accept and to learn. Body shot. In fact, you must unlearn all that you have learned if you want to sit under my teaching. Body shot. My message is simple. Believe in me. Headshot. Not believing in me is what is going to lead you into God's judgment. Headshot. And Nicodemus goes into his corner to think and eventually to believe. As we close out this first round of Jesus' ministry with John the Baptist affirming the identity of Jesus, John the Baptist choosing to step aside, and what he is declaring is what? I recognize the champ is here. He's the one that's fighting. He's the one in center ring. I am simply the one who's recognizing and announcing him. I am Bruce Buffer to Jesus Conor McGregor, right? If that's an easier way for you to understand it. Now it's time for me to step aside. I've done my job. I've announced the champ. And it's time for me to go back to the shadows. And that's how Jesus' early Judean ministry ends almost. 3 more verses before we close out. John chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Jesus knew the Pharisees had heard that he was baptizing and making more disciples than John, though Jesus himself didn't baptize them, his disciples did. So he left Judea and returned to Galilee. These are a bit innocuous, and I heard that little yawn, by the way, bud. It's all good. I'm almost done. These verses are a little innocuous, right? They seem like, oh, sure, and we just kind of gloss over them and say, yeah, they're just transitional verses telling us where Jesus is going. But there's a little bit more to that I don't want you to miss, right? There was a reason. I showed you on the map earlier, right? Cana in Galilee was way up here, and Jesus came all the way down. There was intent and purposefulness in Jesus coming to Judea for Jesus coming into Jerusalem. Judea is the nation where God's people reside, right? This is the heart of the Jewish nation, and Jerusalem is the very center of it. And where else is the King of Kings to go except to the heart of the Jewish nation if he wants to announce himself and be recognized as the King of Kings? But he shows up and he sees the temple being defiled, so he has to go in and clean it up. He realizes that there are people, the leaders, the ones he most wanted perhaps, or maybe should have been most expected to follow him and be excited about the return of the king or the coming of the king, and they're not. They're threatened. They're the ones that are jealous. Jesus has this conversation with Nicodemus. He's announced by John. And what does Jesus do, right? Instead of winning influence among the leading men of the nation, he has been rejected by them. They're jealous of him. They don't see him as someone to follow, but perhaps a threat. He doesn't gain very many followers during this time. In fact, Jesus going into Judea, his first foray into Judea, his entrance into Jerusalem was not a great success at all. Not if you measure it by who follows and who believes. And the fact is, afterwards, Jesus goes in without much fanfare, and he leaves going back to Galilee. So Jesus here ends round 1 going back to his corner, as it were. For the most part, it's gone well, but it's just round 1. The fight isn't over, not by a long shot. But round 2 is about to begin. And that's where we're going to pick up next week. Amen? Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much, God, for this morning, for the opportunity, God, to experience the graciousness of your Holy Spirit, to be able to, as a church, walk together through your word and to be able to see not only the power, but the effect of what you are doing during the course of those first few months of ministry. And I've just been so excited and so honored to be able to go through this with my church family, Jesus, and to be able to see not only the effect of your ministry, but the announcements and the proclamations made during the course of your first few months in ministry. To realize that how you spent that time was not incidental, was not accidental, but purposeful and with clear intent. And God, I just thank you for, as a church body, being able to take some time to recognize that purpose, discern that intent. I would love you so much, and we're so excited and so honored by the fact that you have chosen us to be your kids. I thank you that you told us, even that deep truth that you passed on, the simple truth you passed on to Nicodemus, right? That you, O God, have so loved this world. You have so loved us that you sent your only begotten Son, Jesus, so that whosoever might believe in him, put trust in him, put our faith in him, will not perish but have everlasting life. It really is that simple. And God, I pray that if there are any who've heard that message this day, and have not yet believed, I pray that even now they would take that leap of faith and put their trust in you. You are worthy of it. You are worth following, God. There's nothing else in this world, there's nothing this world has to offer that will satisfy the way you do. We trust that, we believe that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Frank. I learned that Jesus is not only a lover, but he's also a fighter. And so, yeah, we're not called to fight each other, but we're called to fight the principalities and the spiritual forces. So we can't be at war with one another, but yeah, we are at battle. We're on mission, and so we have to look at Jesus and how he is always fighting the enemy, which is not other people. So some announcements we have. The Awakening is having a camping trip this Friday and Saturday at Hannah Park. This is not just a college event. This is open to the whole church. So if you want to come, we will be meeting at UNF at 4 o'clock. Next Sunday, we are having our leadership gathering. So if you are a home group leader, a ministry leader, or if you're next in line, please show up. And baptisms. If you are a believer and you want to be baptized, we are having baptism, so please sign up. And then also on February 20th, we are having a Creating a Life Mission Seminar. So one of the things we'll be doing is crafting a mission statement for your life. And so that's going to help you live your life with laser-like focus so that you can help fight the enemy. So yeah, guys, you are dismissed. Go pick up your kids. Alrighty.